Hi, welcome back to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. In this episode, I want to talk about the next phase of hacking, command and control. Recall, hacking is a process, and we want to talk about command and control as a way to connect back to the installed software that the threat actor is put in play. So what is command and control? Well, once the threat actor has installed their software, they've established a connection between the malware and other devices under their control. That's what command and control is. The goal here is to covertly provide instructions to their malware. It doesn't do them any good if they get caught either by an antivirus program or by a cyber defender. Remaining hidden and obfuscating the direct connections back to their infrastructure is of paramount importance to the threat actor. So what are some common themes with command and control? Well, first, they want to protect their communications. The threat actors want to protect the communications between themselves and the malware that they've installed on their target. And so they're going to use things like encryption. They may also use either off-the-shelf techniques or maybe even custom methods in order to also protect their communications. They also want to try to blend into their environment. So remember, the goal here is to covertly communicate with the malware on target. So I'm going to try to use a lot of common ports and make my traffic blend in with what looks like completely normal network traffic. I might use common ports like port 80 or 443, which are affiliated with web traffic. So if I'm a system administrator and I'm looking at traffic in my network and I see a lot of port 80 and 443, I may think to myself, well, those are my users just surfing the web. It may not be malicious. I also may want to relay commands using perfectly legitimate social media sites or other types of web services. The idea here is that if a system administrator is looking at the traffic and the location to where that traffic is coming from or going to, and they see a common social media site like Instagram or even Facebook, they may say, well, that seems fairly legitimate. Some of my users in my network may want to go ahead and check their Instagram page or check their Facebook page while they're at work. So I'm blending into my environment. Finally, I want to disguise the real origin of the communications, right? So I want to not directly connect to my malware from my own personal computer if I'm the threat actor, right? And the reason being is that if my malware is discovered and they trace my connection from my personal computer, my hacking computer, all the way back to the targeted machine, then law enforcement would probably have a very easy time coming up to my house, knocking on my door, and putting me in handcuffs. So I want to redirect my communications through a third party, oftentimes what we call a proxy. So there's established proxies like the Onion Router or Tor. You may have heard of that before. But we can also use our own custom configurations, right? Other compromised systems to include cloud virtual machines. I could spin those up in your most favorite cloud provider. Right? So there are ways in which I disguise and redirect traffic to make it that much more difficult for people to identify who's actually doing the attacking. So let me give you an example. If I'm a threat actor, what I might actually set up first are a set of proxies. And they could be 1, 2, 3, 4. You could have hundreds of proxies. It really depends on the threat actor and their sophistication and their resources, of course. If they're a hobbyist, they may not have a lot in the way of financial resources, so they may use established proxies like Tor. However, if you're an APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, and you have millions of dollars at your disposal, you may go out and set up your own proxies. Those proxies, in turn, can communicate with other devices, such as cloud virtual machines that I've stood up, and now I can connect my proxies to other devices before I actually hit my target. So in this very simple example, my traffic that I'm sending back and forth between my malware is not going directly from my personal computer as the attacker. I'm actually going through at least 2 different layers. The idea here is to obfuscate where the information, where those packets are going to and from. Make it that much more difficult for people to identify me as the attacker. So let me give you an example of a creative use of command and control. So in 2017, a security company, ESET, investigated a particular advanced persistent threat, Turla. Turla had compromised a lot of different websites that when users would go and visit it, Turla would attempt to download their malware. They would attempt to exploit and install their malware onto user devices. The malware, when executed and installed, would try to resolve a particular URL address that contained the overall command and control web domain. Now here's where it gets clever. The attackers had hidden the address of the domain in the comments section of Britney Spears' Instagram page. You know, Britney Spears, most of you probably know, is a world famous singer. So imagine that. In one comment section of a very specific picture that Britney Spears had posted on her Instagram page, there were comments that when you looked at it seemed, really frankly not to make a lot of sense. But encoded in that particular set of comments were the instructions for this particular piece of malware to communicate back to a command and control server. It's pretty clever. So that specific comment of that specific photo was used to point the malware to the right command and control server. I think this example highlights a lot of the creativity we see that threat actors oftentimes employ to stay hidden and to keep their malware operating as long as possible for them to achieve their objectives. So that leads us to this concept of attribution. Threat actors will use proxies, common communication ports, and creative techniques to manage and hide their activities. So those communications, remember, are often encrypted. And there are multiple layers of redirection that are going on to hide the location of the threat actor. And so it can be difficult to attribute specific tools or techniques to an individual. This is what we call attribution. And you can see with all the complexity we're introducing how hard it might be for threat researchers to actually identify who is behind the attack. And we see threat actors using ingenious techniques to hide in plain sight. And I think this really underscores the creativity that we see amongst threat actors. So what are some of the takeaways? Well, remember, hacking is a process, and the sixth phase is what we call command and control. And command and control really are the actions used to communicate, manage, and hide a threat actor's activity and connect them with their malware. We can use custom or off-the-shelf techniques. And attribution can be difficult because of the interplay of proxies, encryption, and even hiding in common traffic. In our next episode, we're going to talk about the threat actor's actions on target as the final phase of the hacking process. I hope to see you next time.